DNA. Okay, I talked about how science doesn't know really what they're dealing with DNA. This is a point I want to bring together because we talked about fire letters in one part of one workshop, and then we talked about other aspects of DNA in another. This will bring it together a little bit of how these two things work together. Okay, the scalar wave programs. Now we learn up here that DNA are actually the observable portions, chemical translations of scalar wave programs that exist in the morphogenetic field. Okay, scalar wave programs that are held within the DNA imprint. These create the diversity of form. Different programs of scalar waves create different DNA in the manifest levels, which creates different biologies. Okay? These programs, though, the scalar wave part of the DNA, the part below the part they're seeing, we call them fire letters. That's an ancient term that was used in Enochian teachings. And in the Hebrew teachings, they talked about fire letters. They were talking about the scalar wave patterns that, when activated within the DNA, allowed the body to turn to light. It allowed particle and antiparticle to fuse, to turn into fire, and go to the next octave. They were talking about the secret mechanics, and they were always trying, the Hebrews especially, knew this process existed, even with all the repression of information our histories have been about. They knew there was a sequence to fire letters, which are represented in the shapes of the Hebrew alphabet, some of them. They knew there was a sequence that held the secret to higher evolution, held the secret to opening the relationship between man and God. They knew there was a secret to ascension, and it was in the fire letters. They were right. They didn't take it as far as fire letters are scalar wave grids that affect other scalar wave grids of your DNA, that if you do it this way, it can, yes, make you turn into light and go up to the next octave. They didn't take it that far. Once upon a time they did. This information was taught before. They didn't use the term DNA. They didn't need it. That was just another chemical thing that happens as a result of the real stuff underneath. So there were terms in other languages that were applied to the core templates. They were applied to the genetic imprint below the DNA. But it helps to understand. If we want to understand this process of evolution, and if we want to understand what indigos are, we need to understand a little bit about how evolution works in general within our bodies, because it works different with them. Okay? We simply need to understand that we can look at our DNA instead of just identifying it as the chemical components of gene code that science uses now. Look at it as, yes, it's that. But it is also programs of scalar waves that are called fire letters. The DNA is a sequence, several sequences of scalar wave programs run together. They create flash line sequences, to create the templates upon which your matter particles are built. Okay? It is a science. Simply expanding our concept of DNA into the concept of sequences of fire letters upon which the chemical translations manifest will begin to help us understand the process of biological transmutation, which was our original imprint. We were not meant to die. If you understand how to activate DNA, and you can fix the mess that's been done to our DNA, death was not originally part of the human condition. Transmutation was the way to get out of here. You didn't leave a body behind. You didn't have to. The bodies didn't get sick because you knew the mechanisms by which they stayed healthy. That's all been taken away from us because of the way our history unfolded. The indigos are bringing back our heritage. They're bringing back the knowledge. And I know this, and I know it intimately, because I'm one of them. I'm one of the indigos. There's 3 types we'll talk about later. I'm a type 1. And I'm not the only one. There's 350 like me right now. And there's like 2,500,000 of type 3s. So there's a lot of indigos here already. Okay? When I speak about indigos, I'm not speaking about somebody told me something about indigos and I'm passing on to you. I know what it's like to be raised in the indigo body here. I know what the indigo body means and what the gene code is doing. So I'm speaking from the heart as well as the mind when I talk about this stuff. We need to understand how our DNA functions. If we're going to understand how the DNA of the indigos differs from that of human, why they are considered, even though they birthed through human bodies, why, through human parents, why they are considered literally a hybrid ET race. There is a distinct difference in their gene code. And I've done diagrams in these chart packs to show you that difference, because it becomes really apparent when you have the spatial relationships in the visual diagrams. So we'll see that in a little bit. Now, let's see. Okay, we need to also, if we're going to understand the whole process, our ascension process, to understand indigos, we need to understand our ascension process. We've been through these teachings in parts in other workshops. This is like a quick roundup, and especially if anybody that hasn't been to the other workshops, this is the crash course in DNA ascension mechanics. So you get that by the wayside as you learn about indigos. All right. You have biology and consciousness, which are matter and spirit, are intimately intertwined. They're composed of the same substance. This is what science doesn't get either. Consciousness, our bodies, matter particles, are made of units of consciousness. That is the only substance that really exists in the universe. Consciousness is a substance. It can be quantified. It can be grouped. It can be structured. It is not a byproduct of matter particles interrelating with each other. It is not a byproduct of brain chemicals firing in certain sequences that give you the ability to think you're alive. It starts first. Matter, the experience of matter, is built on a core of consciousness. Consciousness is energy, and at least science acknowledges that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. Consciousness cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. This is what the whole thing is about. Energy is consciousness, and consciousness is energy. Science knows energy's always existed. They can't figure out where before energy what was there. There was no before energy, or there would be not now. You know, it gets into those really riddle-like questions: which came first, chicken or the egg? Who knows? You know, because somehow they just always existed, and are representations of each other at different phases. So anyway, if we acknowledge that biology and consciousness are composed of the same substance, we begin to realize this is a part of our mind. We begin to realize that the higher parts of ourselves we don't see are part of our body. We have 15-dimensional anatomy that we're not taught about in health class. We need to be taught about this stuff. I mean, we might learn how to brush our teeth and comb our hair and exercise and do all those good things to keep your physical matter body healthy. But it's like knowing you have a thumb and not realizing you have a hand, an arm, and a whole body with a head and a brain to go with it. This is what's happening and what we're taught about our bodies. We have a 15-dimensional identity structure, which is a 15-dimensional biological structure with 5 harmonics of matter density. We need to learn this if we're going to help indigos. Because the awakening process, the process by which a soul who comes in here and then has the ability to awaken, to remember who it was before so it can remember what it came to do, requires a knowledge of the 15-dimensional identity. You come in here, the gene code shuts down. Those levels of consciousness that were in the higher fields block out. The gene code blocks them out. If you don't have the mechanics here available, say, okay, when that happens, here's how you fix it. Here's how you open up the gene code to bring the rest of you back in. You just stay that way. Indigos are going to stay lost. And that will be a real shame if that happens. Because a lot of them are just going to backfire, and they're going to be like firecrackers holding too much energy, and they're just going to explode. Others are just going to fade and just drop the bodies and leave if they can't awaken. A lot of them go into drugs in the teens because it numbs them. They feel things that they can't put words on yet, and they don't have a belief framework to understand themselves yet. They try to think they're normal. After a while, they realize they differ. They realize they pick up on things that their peers are not picking up on. They realize that all these competitive sports in school, indigos tend to go, how archaic. It's like, the old days when they fed people to the lions for fun. Indigos tend to carry a consciousness with them, even if they can't verbalize it, of aversion to a lot of these things. Type 3s can be competitive, but most of them are just beyond that kind of stuff. And they feel different, but they don't have a framework to understand why they're different or what they're supposed to do with that fact. It gets to be very painful, not to mention the fact that they're so sensitive to electromagnetic frequency that standing by Xerox machines or being in trains that are, electrical trains or any of these things that normal people just don't have a problem with affects them. I used to ride, when I'd ride in a car, the vibration of the motor of the engine would make me physically sick. And it would take me 2 hours of recalibrating my fields and just curling up in a ball and bringing my energy back in to neutralize what simply the vibration from car engines would do. Imagine what indigos living under high-power wires are experiencing. Their bodies go into mutation. They get cancers more easily from it. These children are sensitive to all sorts of things that average people aren't. We'll cover some of that as we get into understand more of who they are. The most important thing I want to get across first is who they are and how that can be possible. By showing you the frameworks of DNA, of multidimensionality, and reminding you how those pieces fit together. That is saying, what I'm going to say next, this is how it's possible. So before I say what I want to say about the indigos, and you go, oh yeah, right, you know, I've already given you a framework to understand where that can be a very rational choice to believe. So that's why I do it this way. I try to break the information down in a way that your logical mind, that just like everybody's logical mind here has been programmed in a certain way by society, that, well, if this, and this aren't met, then it's not real to me. I won't listen. I want people to listen about the indigos and understand who they are, so I have to give the framework. So you can say, well, I don't know if I believe it yet, but I see how it could be possible. If she's right about dimensional structure and DNA and all that stuff, it really could be happening, couldn't it? You know? So that's the level of opening that I want to make in the consciousness. The people in this room are great because most of the people have been through workshops and they've been already familiar with the paradigm. This is the way, if you want to get across to other people, particularly if you happen to be in the psychology area, in the psychology fields or anything like that, or in medical fields, you need to realize you can't just dump it on people because they're going to say, you're absolutely nuts, and if you happen to be in the professional community and let it slip, you're going to be blacklisted big time. You know, they will harass you. You know, if you push forward with movements about it, they will probably try to suspend your licenses and really, you know, mess with you. The government organizations and stuff that control things. This has to be very quietly, an understanding that has to be very quietly and gently moved in to the masses of our race. And it's only going to touch the most intelligent levels of our race who are willing to come out from the old programming and say, you know, maybe it isn't the way we were taught. They're willing to learn something new. But everybody can learn to do this. If you realize, if you explain a little about dimensional structure to somebody, if you're talking to your scientist colleagues or friends like that, say, okay, this is how dimensions work together. Where did you hear that? You know what I mean? Oh, some person's teaching it, but anyway, you know, don't get into me or who I am. Or it doesn't matter. What matters is, oh, I learned it anyway. Let's get to the point. This is an interesting way of looking at things, don't you think? And I've heard that those children that they're having such problems with, actually, it's about this for them. You're showing them a paradigm in a non-threatening way. You're not saying you have to believe this where they say, you're saying this and I'm saying the opposite. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. That gets nowhere. You have to open up the awareness in people. And the people who are getting this information first are the ones who will be able to go out into the world and begin to say, okay, I know something that they don't know and that they're going to want to know. You know? So I have to gently filter this information in the right places, the right individual. There's an opening to metaphysics there. Let's take it that way. We need to spread the awareness of indigos if we want things to work out well over the next 20 years, because they're going to get worse and worse and worse. Indigos are here not only to help themselves grow, to help us grow. They're here for the planet, because there's things happening here that if they weren't here, we wouldn't be here by the end of 2017. Okay, we'll get into that later too. Okay, let's see. Okay, I want to say one more thing about the 5-letter sequences that are really the core of the DNA imprint. Remember, 5-letter sequences are scalar patterns. The manifest chemical components of the DNA are the chemical translations of those 5 letters, or at least the ones they're able to perceive with our equipment of identification. There's a whole interdimensional spectrum of DNA chemical translation they're not able to see yet. Anyway, so we have the 5-letter sequences of each DNA strand correspond to each dimensional band. Each dimensional band in that whole structure of morphogenetic structure, 15 dimensions, each dimensional band is a scalar grid, and it has a specific amount of scalar patterns. Each dimension has 12 sub-frequency bands, which means it has 12 flashline sequences that we talked about before. Okay? These flashline sequences are really what the DNA is, the scalar patterns of the DNA. The flyer letters are the flashline sequences. So not only do our DNA, do we have fire letters that form our morphogenetic structure, the whole universe is composed of these. The whole dimensional structure itself, the progression of from consciousness to matter and back again, there are specific structures of scalar waves that are fire letters. Each dimensional band has a certain configuration of flashline sequences, fire letter sequences. When a form is built up to become manifest and to come down in through the matter densities down into here, it will take on, in its pure form, the arrangement or flashline sequences of each level of the dimensions. So there will be a part of you in your individuated flashline pattern that adopts the flashline patterns of D1, of D2, of D3, of D4, all the way up the 15-dimensional scale. This is reflected in your DNA fire letters. Your DNA fire letters are supposed to be, when they're operating properly, a small version replica of the fire letters of each dimensional band. And by progressively bringing them into activation where they begin to flash on and off, you progressively expand your consciousness and de-densify your matter. This was the process as it originally worked until they started pulling things out of the flash line sequences and twisting the fire letters. Distorting your fire letters is distorting your DNA. And that's what happened to our race. Is one of the reasons the indigos are back. Okay, we can go past that one. Okay. Now, the Diamond Sun 12-strand DNA matrix. People who have been in the workshops before understand that I've talked about the original human imprint being a 12, not a 2-strand DNA pattern. This was the original design. There is an original design, which means somebody designed it. The DNA imprint for the human form. What we have right now are 3 active strands. That's all. We get 3-dimensional consciousness because we have 3 strands activated, which allows only 3 dimensions of frequency, scalar wave patterns, to translate through the hologram into manifestation. Originally, we were supposed to have 12 strands. Now, the strands don't look like this. This is a diagram that I use to show relationships of strands to each other. And to show you, there's other diagrams that in other courses on the DNA that I get more into. I show you what's contained, the basic codes contained in each strand. So this is a diagram. This is not how, if you look real close down into your morph structure, it's going to look like that. There are geometrical relationships of these scalar wave grids that have very specific, what they call geomancies, or angles of interrelationship. This is not those. This is simply a way to show you strand content, strand amount, so you can compare what yours was supposed to be when you were originally designed as being a human consciousness, what it is now, what it needs to grow back into being, so you can reclaim your ascension codes, which are your appropriate fire letter sequences that correspond directly to the dimensional bands. This is what our evolution is about here, even without the indigos. This is what we have been trying to accomplish all along down here on planet Earth, was to try to rebuild our original imprint because it was shattered at one point. It's a morphogenetic field that had 12 primary fire letter sequences, flashing on and off sequences. Some of those frequencies were completely pulled out. The flashline sequences just didn't exist anymore, which threw off the whole calibration of how consciousness related to itself. This is DNA mutation. Mutation of fire letters, distortion of fire letters, distortion of scalar wave patterns translates into DNA mutation, translates into perceptual distortion. We have been living for 200,000 years under perceptual distortion caused by DNA mutation. We have been trying to re-evolve back into the 12-strand DNA pattern, which means each one of these strands, each line here represents a strand. That represents a flash line sequence, a fire letter sequence, that corresponds to one dimension, that corresponds to one dimension of your consciousness. 12 strands implied 12 dimensions of consciousness embodied in a human form, which is an avatar identity that's capable of moving its vibrational rate where it wants to, appearing and disappearing at will, and manifesting in 4 harmonics of matter density wherever it chooses. That was our original potential. We have the ability to reverse mutate that, and I've done workshops on that, and that's what our programs are about. I have the Tangible Structure of the Soul program here, which is the beginning. Cathara Healing is the second level. We're learning to reverse mutate the mess that our DNA is turned into. If we realize our consciousness that we use to, if we think a thought, we are making a waveform. If we hold an image in our mind, we're not just imagining things, as psychology would love to try to get us to believe. We are creators created in the image of the original creator, which simply would think, and thinking, by the process of thinking and cognating, would create many morphogenetic fields within itself. We do this. Every time we think a thought, we're creating a thing in scalar form. We're creating a template that something will manifest upon. If we begin to understand this, and we begin to understand, too, that our DNA is what? It's a scalar pattern. They're the same substance. Waves affect waves. The scalar patterns we put here and direct into the DNA will affect the DNA. You can reverse mutate. You don't need scientists and laboratories and fancy equipment to do this. All you need is to know how to use the equipment you came in with, your mind-body-spirit system. And this is what we teach, how to begin the process of repairing this DNA so we can get our higher levels of consciousness back. So all this stuff they talk about that seems so far out to many people becomes common knowledge, because on your higher dimensional levels of identity, you already know this. You don't need me to teach you there because you already remember. Here we just forgot because the DNA code blocked it. So we're in a process of remembering, not creating something that doesn't exist. We're just remembering what was always ours, which was the 12-strand heritage. It's important to realize this heritage because if we want to understand indigos, we're going to be able to start seeing, with understanding this heritage, how they differ from the basic human imprint in a good way. But it's kind of mind-blowing. If you consider right now, we're working on 3 strands of activation. We're actually, I think, what's the next one there? I want to show the root race chart. That's a ways up, huh? There we go. Okay. Now, we're aiming for, our evolutionary objective is the 12-strand pattern. Okay? We're on 3-strand right now. This is the overall pattern that we have been involved with for many millennia. The 12 tribes and the earth seedings. We're a part of a huge, huge, long-term evolutionary experiment that has been ongoing for many, many thousands of years. This is the 3rd time this race, our race, was seeded on this planet. It got wiped out the other 2 times. And that some of that history is in the Amente, Voyages Amente book. Much more of it is coming in the new book, so I ever get time to write them, because more of it, I have been accessing more. But we need to understand something. There's a pattern in a design that's absolutely beautiful to the evolution of a race. Imagine you're a very high being up there beyond matter density. You're going to create a race. You're a creator God. Not the big God, but a smaller God. We're all faces of God. We all have creative ability. So you're going to create a race of beings. This beautifully designed, eloquent plan was created by which we'd have 12 tribes, 7 root races, and 5 cloister races. The root races would be a period of time on the planet where one type of being that had one type of one of the strands, one of the flash line sequences, moving the consciousness through this certain time period would create evolution of one DNA strand. That's what each root race did. And to get here, it implies you have incarnations in the earlier root races, or you wouldn't have 3 strands. The way you got to be a 3-strand being was to have evolved first through the earlier root races, which are Polarians and Hibernians. They are actually an etheric matter race that started on harmonic 3 of Earth, which is called Gaia. The physical root races started to come in down through here with the Lumians. All right. They were evolving strand 2. In our seeding, these already got wiped out. We're back up here. They reseeded them again. These 2 are all right. They reseeded from number 3, root race 3, Lemurians. They were working on evolving strand 2. So everybody in this room and everybody on the planet, to be here in a strand 3 body implies you have Lemurian incarnations in your cellular memory that gave you the flash line sequences and fire letter sequences. Associate it with that time period. Associate it with strand 2. Associate it with the 2nd dimensional frequency bands. Okay? These were here 73,000 years ago. That's when they got seeded here. Now, with each root race, there was a cloister race that came in with the purpose of 2 things. First, the cloister race would come in first and birth through the root race potential. The cloister race was a bigger flashline sequence DNA. It had more strands. And out of that, smaller versions would come to evolve the particular strands of the lower parts. So each root race had a cloister race affiliation. 75,000 years ago, the first race to come in physical were called the Urantrians. They had in their flashline sequence of birth strand 2 plus 7 through 12. Now notice with all the cloister races, they have whatever the single strand is that their root race went with, but they also have strand 7 through 12. They held the potential of the 12-strand pattern, anchored it here into the race morph field, so it would be a potential for the races. Because if they just came in with one strand, they would have stayed one strand. You needed to have a race that would hold these higher potentials while the lower potentials were evolved and the strands were built up to meet them. The process and design of our evolution is literally passing through these thousands and thousands of years of root and cloister race cycles to progressively and very slowly rebuild the flashline sequences of our 12-strand DNA pattern. It didn't have to be that slow, but it was an agreement made by stellar races that would be stretched out over many thousands of years. Because the last time we were up there in this race, we got a little full of ourselves and created some real messes. So there are beings in the higher harmonics that don't want to hear anything about giving humans the key to the kingdom again. Not anytime soon. They want to make sure when we evolve down here, we get it this time, and we learn compassion, and we learn to use our power with wisdom, because we almost blew a planet up when our race was in the higher harmonics. That's how we got down here in the first place. So there's a lot of politics going on in the higher harmonics with the beings who reside there as far as how much humans are going to be allowed to know. When it was finally agreed that they'd even let us re-evolve to get our consciousness back out of being stuck down in this harmonic in fragmented form, they agreed to allow the Mente rescue mission to take place. We fragmented from harmonic 2 the consciousness of the race that was the human race there. Fragmented. Literally, its morphogenetic field blew apart, and little fragments of consciousness just blended in with the dimensional frequency bands down here. And they would have stayed as undifferentiated units of consciousness if the original imprint of their morphogenetic template was not re-entered down here so they could start to build back up into it. It was building our consciousness back up in this harmonic to get back to what we were before we blew ourselves apart. It's hard to understand from our scientific perspective that doesn't even like to acknowledge anything above D3. But it was a very grand evolutionary plan of races over long periods of time to give us back our original potential. At this point, we are here. And when I speak about Aryan race, every one of the root races has all of the colors. Okay, so Aryans are not just white. You know, there are black Aryans, there are red-skinned Aryans. They're basically red, white, black, brown, and yellow were the basic skin categorizations, and there's all sorts of combinations of all of those. So each one of the root races had a predominant cloister race that had a predominant one of those colors, but then they would have all of the other colors in each race. So every race color was represented equally in all of the root and cloister races. Now, we've managed to evolve through our Lemurian period. The next one was to evolve strand number 3 in the fourth root race cycle. That began with the Branoa cloister. Now, I was a member of this. I had an incarnation in that period, a couple of them in that period, so I remember certain things from that period. Last time they were here was about 72,000 years ago. Before that, before they got wiped out the first time, they were here 3 million years ago. These are ancient, ancient races we're talking about here. Okay? Before that, I believe they came in. No, we didn't get that. Yeah, we got that far. 12 million years ago. So when we talk about the Branoa race, which are actually related more closely than any of the other cloisters except the Melchizedeks to the Indigos, we're talking about ancient, ancient races of beings here. There's an ancient genetic imprint. So right now, we've managed to get to the point where we're of the Aryan fifth root race cycle. Most of the people on the planet, and probably few of the people in this room, are of the Aryan root race. Evolving strand 4, just coming into opening up fourth dimensional frequencies into your awareness, just beginning to acknowledge the astral level of existence, just beginning to have perceptions associated with fourth dimensional consciousness. That's where most people are at in our present times. Most people in this room are probably more so into here or here, where you're working on fourth through fifth strand development, because the information that I'm carrying comes in on a minimum of fifth dimensional frequency at this point. People who can't hold fifth dimensional frequency in their consciousness, they don't have the flashline sequence receptors for it, will not be drawn to this information. They can't process it. They won't be able to grasp it, and that's okay. So the people who are drawn here, sitting in these rooms, learning this stuff, it implies that you have a gene code that has some of the higher strand content to some degree, because that's drawing you in to receive information that's coming in on these frequencies. But most of us, most of the people on the planet walking around out there in Sleepersville are of the Aryan race, just beginning strand 4 activation. When we see that, and then later we're going to see what the Indigos are, there's a striking difference here. Okay. All right, these guys, the Aryans started about 65,000 years ago. They came out of the Haibiru cloister. Now, the Haibiru is not the Hebrew. They're different. They're two different race strains, interrelated, but different. Okay. The Haibirus were working on strand 4 plus 7 through 12. They were here about 68,000 years ago. When we look at our race lines here, and I can go right down to telling you, as far as races that exist on the planet now, where they came out of, what matrix they came out of. I'm not going to do that, because right now the consciousness on this planet would take that information and use it to hate each other more. They would use it to divide themselves and to point fingers, I'm better than you are, and to try to dominate each other. So there's a level where I won't plug in the final plugs to tell you, you know, what this race is, what that race is, what that race is. But I will mention what the Hebrews are, because actually all of our seeding has to do, this time, has to do with the Hebrews that came from the race cycles before, when everybody got destroyed. Okay? We've had Hebrew-Egyptian lines. This is where all of these root races and all these cloister races came out of in this third seeding, out of the Urtites, 800,000 years ago. That's when this whole third seeding process came into being. Back down here in seed number 2, which was like from 3,700,000 years ago to about 848,800 years ago, that's when we tried this before. So, you know, same root races, same cloister races, didn't get very far. But some of the individuals from the cloister races here survived. And they were taken to other planetary systems. Some were taken to inner Earth systems. We got the Hebrew strains in through here, right at the end. It was an attempt to save the declining races here, because they were getting into genetic mutation through Anunnaki visiting and messing with the gene code. Is a mixed cloister race. We have the Hibiru, which is the fifth cloister that goes with the Aryan root race. And up above that, we have the Melchizedek races. And you'll see this word in the New Age movement a lot these days. Melchizedek this, Melchizedek this. What in the world is Melchizedek? And it's true. It meant many things, but one of them was it's a literal cloister race of beings. And they are starting to enter here now. They're starting to enter their birthing cycles. But these are even small compared to what the Indigos are. The Melchizedeks are very advanced. They come in with strand 5 in their birth imprint. And their life cycle is about activating strand 5. Really, that's a future time. The Muvarian root race would be in the future from where we are. So when we have the Melchizedeks birthing in, they're beginning the next wave of evolution that would normally come through the Muvarians. When we move from strand 4 into 5 activation, probably several 100,000 years in the future. Indigos are even beyond this. You'll love this when you get beyond it. But you need to understand this basic structure to see, okay, who's at what stage of evolution? Each one of these races represent a phase or stage of evolution evolving back up toward the 12-strand pattern and beyond. Okay, so right now we have some Melchizedeks coming in. Many of the people drawn to this material, because it comes in on a D5 frequency, which goes with the 5th strand. They have the 5th strand, which means they have a receptor to pull in 5th dimensional frequency, which means that they can respond to information that comes in on this frequency. So most people that respond to this at all have something to do with Melchizedek gene code in them. You're probably part of a cloister race, just to be in this room, this cloister. But if you're indigo, you're even more than that. Okay, I'm a Melchizedek, but I'm an indigo Melchizedek, and we'll get into the differences later. Okay, we'll get into this, too, when we're understanding indigos. The Uniseti cloister. That's supposed to go with the one I can't even pronounce, Uinjuki 7th root race, that's evolving strand 6. Remember, we're down here right now. Okay, evolving strand 6. They're a future race, and harmonic 2, where Earth there is called Tara. Okay? They're many, many, many thousands of years in the future before our race would naturally evolve into that imprint in its original design. The indigos come in with strand 6 activated. People here come in with strand 3 activated. Most people. They birth in with the 3rd strand activated. They spend the process of this life and many others afterwards, possibly until they're done, activating strand 4. Then they birth into this race and they do strand 5. Then they come into strand 6 activation. It's a completely different race by then. It's a whole different root race. It's a whole different race cycle. It's a future race cycle. The indigos, one of the special features is that they're born with 6-strand activation. When you go into the dimensional scale, this is why they're called indigos. It's a New Age term that was coined by people who can see auric fields, who notice that they tend to have a real concentration of the blue frequency spectrum in their auric fields, more than average. There's a reason for that. The 6th-dimensional frequencies that go with the 6th strand have what's called a capstone color. Now, every dimension has a capstone color, which is its primary wave spectra. If we remember, the color is a wave spectra, a wave pattern. Every dimension has a capstone, which is the primary wave pattern. Then it has all these little wave patterns inside of it that are the color spectrums within it. Blue, indigo, goes with, we have blue on strand 5, indigo on strand 6, and then goes into violet in strand 7. Dimension 7 goes with violet Dimension 6 goes with indigo. That's where they get indigo. They didn't even realize this. They were reading the auric fields and saying, I see this color. It wasn't known yet about the design of the DNA evolution, so nobody knew yet to look for what does that mean with the strands. But it's kind of interesting that it translates right into that. Strand 6, the capstone color, is indigo. They're born with strand 6 activated and strand 5 activated. Most Aryans are born with 3 activated and the imprint for strand 4. They don't even have the imprint for strand 5, 6, or 7 through 12. If you happen to be born a cloister, now these are mostly out of here by now. It's like a race cycle that phased out and moved into the next level, into the Aryan root race. Now we're moving into the Melchizedeks coming in. These are very special individuals. They have higher consciousness abilities because they are born with the strand 4 activated most of the time and the imprint for strand 5, which compared to the Aryans is much advanced. Compared to the Hybiru, it was advanced. So it's a progressive advancement of strand activation and integration of consciousness, which creates genetic evolution of the race while simultaneously creating consciousness evolution of the race. It's called biospiritual evolution. That's the process we're all involved in, whether we realize it or not. When we get into beings up here, they're not even supposed to be here right now. They're beings from future race cycles. The consciousness of those beings has many more flashline sequences in it than ours do, many more scalar grids, which means more awareness. They have access to more of their higher dimensional identity than we do, and they have this from birth. This can be a gift, and it can also be a curse. And the way our society is structured right now, to the indigos, it's a curse. It makes it almost intolerable to be here for some of them. Now, they're even more than that. This is just the beginning, 6-strand activation. It's much more than that. When we get into who are these consciousnesses coming in and where are they coming from, that's when it gets amazing. That's when we learn something that has not been clearly put here for many thousands of years, which is, where did we come from? What is our lineup of consciousness? What races did we come down through the matter densities from? Okay? Obviously, the fact that we're in physical matter implies that once upon a time we were part of some race that had semi-physical matter, semi-etheric matter, and then a race above that that had etheric matter. There are races of beings, not just individual parts of yourself, but individual parts of races that went all the way up the dimensional scale. There's a stellar heritage here that has been totally banned from our history books by the Anunnaki primarily, because they wanted to be able to manipulate from behind the scenes like little humans down in a petri dish. We're the little sheep to play with, and just make sure they don't know too much, because they might rebel and decide they don't want to play, your God and we're subservient anymore. The information that we're giving here on the DNA, on who we are, is essential to understanding who indigos are, because you can see where they differ, but it's also a revelation for us. It's our chance to grab this information and run, to get out of the mind control, distorted history nonsense. We have been taught for years and centuries and thousands of years to say, wait a minute, there's a part of me that remembers some of this. I did come from somewhere higher, and this is the way it works. That's when you throw out the history books and say, all right, let me remember how it works. Let me remember how to reclaim this. Let me remember how to do cellular transmutation, for one. That would be really great. I don't have to incarnate down here in the densities anymore. Yes. You'll start to remember. We got to realize we're part of a huge evolution program. And the only reason we don't know this is because when we were in our very small, just beginning to evolve down here days, each time we were thrown down here with the lower strands, the ones who were controlling this design, some of them decided they weren't going to let us in on the secret. Others decided they were going to take this original design and do something completely different with it and hijack it. There are beings in Harmonic 2 that have 11th dimensional consciousness. They have the ability to have 11 strands of DNA. Do not want humans to get back to being 12-strand DNA. Why? We'll have a whole other dimension of consciousness beyond their own. We'll have stronger genetic capacity than their own, and we will be more powerful, aware, and intelligent than they are. We will be a force to contend with, because we will realize at that point what they did to the evolutionary cycles of our race here. And they're very nervous that we may be very upset when they find out how, by being so helpful, they mutated this race, where it took many more thousands of years to move through this design than it was supposed to. It was not supposed to take all these millions of years to get the 12-strand pattern back. That happened because continually races that did not want this race to evolve back into what it was made sure they interrupted the evolutionary cycles, or hijacked it, or mutated it, or took it this way or took it that way, just so it doesn't go back to the 12-strand pattern. Many of our religious teachings were purposely seated there to put us in subservience to some God figure, not teach us the ascension mechanics at all, and to make sure we never realized that we were embodiments of Creator. We didn't need middlemen. We have power in the fact that we are part of Creator, just like those higher beings that like to play God are. They didn't want us to know this. Our race has been mutated repeatedly. This is one of the reasons why the Indigos are back. Because at this point, if it doesn't get changed, if some intervention isn't done, our gene code is going to go right down the tubes, and we will completely lose as a race this capacity. It will be mutated out of the potentialities down here, and we'd have to reseed the whole thing all over again. The ones in higher harmonics who have assisted us in getting this far are very tired too. They're tired of it getting to a certain level and collapsing again. It's like trying to build a snow fort, and every time you get to the roof it falls in, and you have to start over. After a while you say, you know, maybe on to another project. You give up. They don't want to give up. The ones who are really our elder races, what we came out of, they don't want to give up on our evolution here. But if they let it get any further down, if it goes any further down, it's going to be a whole other race. This race that we're turning into now, by the mutations we carry and by amplifying those, will completely block out our ability to reclaim the 12-strand pattern. We will become something that was not particularly foreseen or intended, a different type of consciousness that is three-dimensional, stuck in three-dimensional phase lock, will always be finite until it burns itself out and turns back into dust, dust into dust. If we evolve to the 12-strand pattern, we will be able to progressively accrete or bring to ourselves the higher levels of consciousness, move out of incarnation cycles in harmonic 1, up into harmonic 2, then up into harmonic 3, and move our way out of density while retaining our memory and our sentient identity. If you take that potential away and you cut something off at the 3rd strand, what you're doing is making it so they can get up to the 3rd dimension, 3rd-dimensional consciousness. At that point, the body shuts down and dies. The consciousness leaves the body, goes up into the higher bands without a body for a little while, has to find another body, create another body down here, and it reincarnates again, over and over and over, until eventually the amount of consciousness that was held within that original 3-dimensional part of the consciousness gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You're using up energy, and you've cut off the supply, the perpetual supply that comes from direct connection to source through the higher identities. When that happens, gene codes digress, and when that happens, consciousness gets to the point where it can't hold a human pattern. It can't incarnate anymore into a human form. So it goes backward instead of forward into evolution. It goes into de-evolution, back into eventually space dust, or units of consciousness within the lower 3-dimensional fields that will become used to manufacture other constructs of consciousness. You can always be you're always part of God, and you can do it in 2 ways. Being sentient, fully aware of who you were, who you are now, and your whole identity and consciousness are intact, or you can simply not be self-aware at all and exist within God as part of the substance that God creates with. It's up to us whether we want to evolve up into cognition or simply be space dust to be used for other beings who have cognition that are creating things. We're always part of it. We're always part of the universe. This is always part of it. This has been our plan. This has been what we have been denied for very, very long. I'm going to put one more out before we go. What we got there? All right, we'll just go back to this. I'm getting told I need a break here. Are you guys ready for like a, yeah? All right, am I throwing too much at you?
Really hydrated today.
Yeah, we didn't even find out what indigos really are yet. Yeah. Once you find out what it means as far as identity, it's mind-blowing. It really is. I'm very relieved because it took me till I was 35 to finally understand what the hell I was. Okay? To put it bluntly, I knew I was different. That became very, very obvious. It became extremely obvious when from the age of like 7, I had beings from other dimensions coming in and taking me through portals into inner earth and training me and doing all sorts of things that, forget even trying to explain to a psychologist, they warned me not to. I was told, don't even go there. This is between us. You will understand someday. And progressively, we worked with it. But I am so relieved. I finally understand what I am because I understood the stuff about the DNA and the levels and dimensions. The indigos are coming, and it's a real relief to me because I'm not alone. And neither are the people. There may be indigos sitting here right now that you don't know you're an indigo yet either. I didn't know when I first came in. I just knew, boy, was I different. There was something that didn't quite fit here, and I progressively had experiences that took me further and further into paranormal land, extraordinary experience. And I couldn't understand for a long time why. There may be people here that by finding this information, you have a new framework now. You might be saying, do I fit into that? Maybe I do. Gosh, maybe I'm an indigo. And when you start to realize what that means in terms of identity, who you are that's coming in here, you start to have some self-respect and start to get your priorities together. Because you say, oh, geez, yeah, I'm an indigo. That resonates. Oh, my God, I did come here to do something. I'm starting to remember what I came here to do. I was part of a World Service team. We're here to try to stop pole shift. The indigos are here for huge reasons that our scientists are not even ready to fathom.